been quiet for a little bit, but quiet no longer. Penn State has another commitment, which is why you're seeing our lovely faces here on the screen. I'm Thomas Reinkard. That is our recruiting insider, Ryan Snyder. Penn State has a commit in the class of 2023 during its biggest recruiting weekend. They were able to secure one Joseph Mapoy, who was at the official visit and came to the Nittany Lions. So, Ryan, tell us more about what's going on with Mapoy.
Yeah, 6'4", 235, from Congo. So let's get into his background for a second because I think it's interesting. Grew up in Congo, comes to the United States. I think it was 2 years ago, maybe three. Off the top of my head, I think it was 2 or 3. To play basketball primarily. He comes to Archbishop Carroll in Washington D.C. Plays basketball for a year. Decides, I think he got injured. Just wasn't exactly going, from a scholarship perspective, maybe the way he wanted it to be. I'd like to actually dig a little bit more there and talk to him about it more. But I know he gives up basketball. The coaches at Archbishop Carroll kind of, start seeing him, what he does on the basketball court and kind of get him an opportunity to come play football. So last year, he plays football for the first time at Archbishop Carroll. He's playing next to Nicholas Harbor, who, of course, I think if you're a Penn State fan, you know who Nicholas Harbor is by now. He's a 5-star football player and a track athlete, really. Maybe more so a 5-star track athlete than anything. But the point there is just that he had a lot of eyes on him. And that's how I first learned about Vicky is actually his nickname, Vicky Mapoy. That's how I first learned about him, talking to Penn State people. They're saying, hey, when you watch that Nicholas Harbor film, do you see the other defensive end over there? He's just a first-year player, but they were really excited about what they saw from him athletically and things like that. So that's when things started going. Joseph comes to the whiteout game last year against Auburn. That was a good visit. Penn State offers at some point, but I wouldn't say things really got rolling with Joseph. They had interest, but they weren't really intrigued at pushing hard, I guess is the right word to say, until maybe sometimes towards the summertime. He comes to Penn State July. Good visit, unofficial visit with mom. Mom, by the way, lives in Washington, D.C. I think that's a big part of this commitment because it's close to where mom lives. That was a big part of this. But anyway, goes up to St. Thomas More. He had to go to St. Thomas More because of his age. I believe he's 19. I don't 100% have that, but I know he had to leave Archbishop Carroll because of his age. Goes to St. Thomas More, which is up in New England. He's still technically a senior too. He's not a prep player like Zion Tracy. I think that's important to clarify. Goes up there, has another solid season. Penn State stays on him. A couple other schools showing interest. I know Auburn was showing interest for a long time. I believe Ole Miss was another. Louisville was another, which is interesting. Louisville loses their coach. Auburn loses their coach.
Right.
So that kind of, that played a part in this all too. And just long story short, comes out and ends up joining Penn State. I'll say this, from the visit in July is when I really got to feel that, okay, Penn State's serious about him. They want to see how he plays and keeps progressing, of course. He's certainly a player that will have to continue to develop. I don't want to say he's a project player because there's a lot to like about what he brings physically. But he's still learning the game. He's only played it 2 years is really what I'm trying to push on there. So, of course, they like what they saw enough this season. They needed athleticism there, and he brings plenty of that, especially if you watch his basketball film. It's incredibly impressive. And then he comes back for the whiteout game this year. That was another big visit as well. He spoke really highly of that. So I would just point to that visit in July and then this whiteout visit as the points where it really started to become clear that Penn State is a serious player here.
And if you're watching here on the YouTube channel, he's stacked. He looks like he's 19. So the age factor in his recruitment is absolutely a thing. And I think it's a really interesting mix of what you have on film. That whiteout game, and then kind of progressing here to this weekend officially. Penn State now with several defensive ends in the class, and something that you and I have talked about, the numbers at certain positions. This push for defensive ends here late in the season. What's going on behind that with Mapoy and of course Jameel Lyons, who's in the class?
Yeah, I just, it's a need for defensive end. I don't know what else to really tell you there. I mean, they see guys they like. They want to add more numbers there. I think it's really just as simple as that. I mean, I don't really see too many outgoings. I mean, of course, Rodney McGraw was an outgoing. We were expecting Rodney McGraw to be an outgoing. We've talked about Rodney before on the message boards. He has a son in Indiana. There was talk for a long time that Rodney had to get out. So that's part of it. But really, I think they need some more athleticism there, and I think they feel good about the guys they have there. But it's a position where you're always rotating, and that's the same for interior guys too. So if you have quality guys there, you might as well add them.
So you said 6'4". I've seen on his profile 6'6". Is it 6'4"?
6'4.5".
Okay. All right, because he looks like he's about 6'7" on film. You know, when you watch him against even at St. Thomas More with some of the highlights, he is a big framed guy. 245 pounds already, somewhere in that area. So when you talk about, you mentioned he's not a project player from a physical standpoint. It's really impressive to watch him on the football field. He looks like an NFL defensive end already. The 33-inch arms, that's what you're looking for at the position. A lot of things that he does are prototypes for the position. Getting into a little bit of his film room here, I want to show you the one thing when we say project player, Ryan. There's a lot of things that could mean, and there's a lot of different areas of football that you have places you need to grow. And for me, when I watched his film, he uses his hands pretty well. But there's one thing I noticed, and I want to point this out, and I want to get right up in here. Watch the way he runs. As a defensive end, he runs with his arms out, bracing for contact. I'm going to show you this here again, because this was the area where I'm like, okay, that's a raw athlete, but what am I looking at? He doesn't pump his arms when he is pass rushing. So, like, the learning how to run, in a certain sense, is going to be a part of his progress at Penn State. So physically, when you're looking at a guy who's 6'4.5", 240 pounds, all these athletic tools, there's a reason right now that he is where he is. And it's you mentioned he's only been playing football for 2 years. And I think the learning curve of what he's being taught of how to use his hands, because look at that, great swipe move. But he has to learn not to do this like a cartoon character, like a cartoon Frankenstein, when he's running into the offensive line for his pass rush. So I don't even really know how fast he is, given that he needs to relearn how to get off at the line of scrimmage. That's going to be an interesting thing to me about his progress as an athlete in general. But you really like the tools he has. And I think part of some of the other things in his profile is at Archbishop Carroll, he played a 5 technique, essentially, which is he's playing directly over the head of the offensive tackle, not typically in the star pass rusher role. And then St. Thomas More, unfortunately, there is very little film of him or Zion Tracy at St. Thomas More. So when it comes to like his progress over the last year, there's less information, but he is lined up at defensive tackle and pass rushing quite a bit on his highlight tape. So those are two things. I don't think he's a defensive tackle. That's not what I'm saying. But where he was used and his progress in learning some of these things we're talking about, I'm pretty confident saying that a lot of those things they're not really focusing on that right now. The closer you are to the ball as a pass rusher, the less space there is, the more, using that immediately reaching out and attacking with your arms makes sense. So I think it makes more sense that they've adapted what he does rather than teaching him from the position and kind of the groundwork where he needs to grow as a pass rusher. So that's kind of a read on Joseph McPoy. We'll have a full film room on him coming up at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. A great place to sign up for just $10 to get all this inside information. Ryan will be breaking this news behind the scenes. The stuff comes out later. If you want to get to the main source, you want to go mainline with the information, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. But of course, like this video, sign up for Blue White Illustrated here on YouTube, because we're talking about and breaking all that news here as well. And all you have to do is subscribe and like for that. Ryan, anything else on Joseph McPoy or anything on the class that you want to do looking forward here with what we see going into the early signing period?
Not too much. I mean, you brought up 33-inch arms. I think he has a pretty big hand size too. It's like almost 10. I think it's like 9'6" or something like that. So there's a lot to like there. If you get the opportunity to try and find his basketball highlights, I forget where I found them. I think they're maybe YouTube or somewhere. As you mentioned, there's not a ton of highlights and St. Thomas More stuff out there, but his basketball stuff's really impressive. You got to search for it. I can't remember exactly where I found it off the top of my head, but you can just really see him jump, watching him dunk the ball, watching him move in space. That I just know those basketball highlights played a big a big role in Penn State's interest in Joseph. But he never camped at Penn State, so we don't have any 40 times or anything like that. But just a lot of athleticism there, and this is a player that Penn State would like to mold. So I think they know what they have in Jameel Lyons. Jameel was very productive on the field, and then they have testing numbers and all that for Jameel. We don't have that for McCoy, but he certainly impressed them last year at Archbishop Carroll, and they haven't seen anything that they dislike, I guess you would say, from his time at St. Thomas More.
So 2 upside plays in Jameel Lyons, a guy that we've seen that has produced, as you said, at the high school field, and then, of course, with Joseph McCoy. So I think a good rebound from where they were previously with the TJ Parker decommitment and things like that. So we'll monitor everything else that's going on with the class of 2023. That'll do it for now on our breaking news segment for Penn State football recruiting. Once again, subscribe to Blue White Illustrated on YouTube so you don't miss the next commit for the Nittany Lions.